Right now, under the hood of thousands of cars, a part somebody bolted on to make the engine stronger is quietly doing the exact opposite. It's coating the engine's most important sensor in a film of oil. It's letting fine grit slip past into the cylinders. And it's costing power and fuel and eventually real money, while the owner has no idea because he was told this thing was an upgrade. After 20 years on the shop floor, I've wiped that oily film off more sensors than I could ever count. And every single time, the driver swears he did everything right. He did do one thing wrong. He believed the box. Here's what that performance air filter is actually costing you. Power you never gained, gas mileage you're pouring out the tailpipe, a sensor that runs a few $100s to replace, and in the worst cases, a repair that climbs well into 4 figures. And the part that's really going to sting? The plain paper filter it replaced was doing a better job for almost nothing. Let me show you exactly how a thing sold as an upgrade turns into one of the most expensive mistakes under your hood. Start with what your air filter is actually there to do. Your engine breathes an enormous amount of air. For every gallon of fuel it burns, it swallows thousands of gallons of air, and every bit of that air has to be cleaned before it reaches the cylinders. Dust, grit, fine sand, all of it has to be caught, because once it's inside the engine, it acts like grinding paste on your cylinder walls and piston rings. The factory paper filter does that job quietly and well. It's densely pleated to trap the fine stuff, it seals inside a closed airbox, and it costs next to nothing. That closed airbox matters more than it looks. It's fed by a snorkel that pulls cooler air from outside the engine bay, and cooler air is denser air, which is exactly what an engine wants. A lot of the flashier cold air intakes that replace it do the opposite of what the name promises. They hang an open filter right out in the hot engine bay, so the engine ends up gulping heated air and handing back whatever tiny gain the extra flow was supposed to buy. Then, along comes the upgrade. A high-flow filter, usually oiled cotton gauze in place of paper, sold on one simple promise. It lets the engine breathe easier, so you get more power and a throatier sound. It's the kind of thing a well-meaning grandson installs on a Saturday afternoon, or a man treats himself to because the ad made it sound like free horsepower. The whole problem is buried in 2 words that sound perfectly harmless: oiled and high flow. Make no mistake, this myth is everywhere. It's on every forum, in 1,000 videos, passed hand to hand at every Cars and Coffee. The idea that your engine is gasping behind a restrictive filter, and one part will set it free. The aftermarket built an industry on it, and that deep new sound sells the illusion better than any dyno sheet ever could. A louder intake feels like power, even when the numbers say nothing changed. Here's what they don't print on that box. That filter is coated in a sticky oil that's supposed to help the gauze grab dust, but just downstream of it sits your mass airflow sensor, the MAF, and that sensor is the single most important set of eyes your engine has. It measures precisely how much air is coming in, so the computer knows precisely how much fuel to add. Air and fuel have to stay in balance, and the MAF is what keeps them there. The way it measures is delicate. It reads the air by running a tiny heated wire or plate and sensing how fast that element cools as air rushes past. To read true, it has to stay perfectly clean. Now put an oiled filter in front of it, especially one that's been re-oiled by hand, which people almost always overdo. That oil mists off the gauze, rides the airstream, lands on the hot element of the MAF, and bakes on as a varnish. And a MAF sensor wearing a coat of oil reads low. It tells the computer that less air is coming in than really is. The computer trims the fuel back to match that false reading, and now your whole engine is running wrong, chasing a lie its own sensor is telling it. That's the trap. The upgrade didn't just fail to help. It blinded the one sensor everything else depends on, and the MAF touches almost everything. The computer leans on that airflow reading to set the fuel, to hold a steady idle, and on a lot of cars to decide how the transmission shifts. Let the reading drift far enough, and the car can drop into a limp mode that caps your power to protect itself. The cruelest part is how slowly it creeps in. The oil builds a little at a time, the car runs a little worse a little at a time, and the driver simply adapts. He never once connects today's rough idle to the filter he installed 8 months ago. Worse still, the trouble code it finally throws often points somewhere else entirely, so people start throwing parts at it. Oxygen sensors, spark plugs, a fuel pump, chasing a ghost that started at the air filter. Drop a comment below. Did you ever run one of these? And did your gas mileage actually get better? Or did it quietly get worse? I already know what most of you are going to say. But a blinded sensor is only the beginning of what that oil sets in motion, and the damage waiting downstream is where the real money goes. When the MAF reads low and the computer cuts the fuel to match, your engine ends up running lean. Too much air for the fuel it's being given. A lean engine hesitates when you step on it. It stumbles at idle and can surge on the highway, and sooner or later, it trips a check engine light with a lean code stored behind it. Some engines swing the other way and run rich instead, dumping in extra fuel, washing the oil off the cylinder walls with raw gasoline, and sending your mileage straight into the ground. Either way, you feel it as a car that just doesn't run as crisp as it used to, and you pay for it at the pump every single week. If you ever put a scan tool on one of these, you can watch it happen in the numbers. The computer keeps a running correction called fuel trim, its ongoing measure of how far off the mixture is running. And on a car with a fouled MAF, that number drifts further and further from zero as the computer fights to make up for a sensor that's lying to it. That drift is the machine telling you, in plain figures, that something up front is wrong. Then there's the dirt, and this is the part that does the slow, quiet damage. A lot of these high-flow filters, especially when they haven't been oiled and seated exactly right, simply don't filter as finely as the humble paper element they replaced. That looser weave lets more dust through, and in a dusty part of the country, that dust rides straight past the filter and into the engine, sanding your cylinder walls a little more with every mile you drive. That's the damage that never announces itself. A good paper filter catches particles down to just a few microns, far smaller than anything your eye can see. And it's exactly that invisible fine dust that scores rings and cylinder walls and slowly bleeds away your compression. You don't lose an engine like that in a week. You lose it across tens of thousands of miles you'll never get back, over a filter you bolted on to help it breathe. And at the very end of this chain sits your catalytic converter. Run lean, run rich, or misfire for long enough, and the raw fuel and heat cook that converter from the inside. And that's the repair nobody sees coming, the one that turns a filter you bought for a little extra sound into a four-figure afternoon. Here's why that happens. When the mixture is wrong, unburned fuel can slip past the cylinders and light off inside the converter instead, and that raw heat melts the honeycomb of precious metal it's built around. Once that substrate is scorched, the converter is finished, and it takes your emissions test and a serious chunk of your wallet down with it. I don't have to guess at a word of this. Pull the intake tube on a car wearing one of these oiled filters, shine a light on the MAF, and most of the time you'll see it sitting right there. A brownish, greasy haze on an element that's supposed to be spotless. I've cleaned that same film off hundreds of sensors, and it's always the same story riding with it. A high-flow filter up front, and a car that's run just a little bit off ever since the day it went on. Set two Ford F-150S side by side, same year, same engine. One is running the factory paper filter in its sealed box. The other got the oiled high-flow upgrade about a year ago. The stock truck reads clean, idles smooth, and gets the fuel mileage it always got. The upgraded truck has a faint lean code hiding in its computer, a MAF wearing that telltale haze, and fuel economy its owner will tell you just isn't what it used to be. Same truck, same engine. One is stock and running right, the other paid for an upgrade and bought itself a problem. Put a scanner on both, and the story's right there in black and white. The stock truck's fuel trims sit near zero, and the modified ones are pulled well off, the computer quietly straining to correct for a sensor it can no longer trust. A retired machinist out in Bakersfield brought me his Ram 1500, embarrassed because he, of all people, felt he should have known better. He'd put a high-flow intake on it, expecting a little more grunt and a deeper note. What he got was a rough idle, a check engine light, and mileage that dropped enough to notice on every tank. The oil off that filter had glazed his MAF. Cleaning the sensor brought it partway back, but it never read quite right again, and he ended up buying a new sensor to set it straight, a few $100s to fix a problem he had paid to create, on top of what the intake cost him in the first place. The stock filter, the one he'd tossed in the trash, would have cost him next to nothing and done the better job. Quick reminder before I show you how to undo this and keep it from ever costing you again. If this is the kind of straight talk you're here for, hit that subscribe button. Here's how you fix it and how you make sure it never bites you twice. The fix is refreshingly simple, and it starts by going backward. If you've got one of these oiled high-flow filters on your car right now, the honest move is to put the factory airbox and a fresh paper filter back on. A quality paper filter runs $15 to $30. It seals properly, it filters finer, and on a stock engine, you will not lose one bit of real power by going back to it, because that intake was never what was holding your engine back to begin with. Putting the stock setup back is about a 20-minute job in your own driveway with hand tools. The factory airbox usually bolts right back in, and if the original was thrown out, one turns up cheap at a wrecking yard. If you'd rather a shop handle it, any honest one will do it gladly and clean your sensor while they're in there. It's the shop that tries to talk you into keeping the performance piece you'd want to think twice about. If your MAF is already fouled, don't run out and buy a new one just yet. There's a proper MAF sensor cleaner that comes in a spray can for about $10, made for exactly this job. You unplug the sensor and slide it out, spray the element clean without ever touching that fragile wire, let it dry all the way, and set it back in. A great many glazed sensors come right back to life on that alone. If it's too far gone to recover, then you replace it. And you use the correct sensor for your car, not the cheapest one in the catalog, because a bargain MAF can read just as wrong as a dirty one. Now, if you're determined to keep a washable filter, some folks just like them, then the whole game is discipline. Clean it, let it dry completely, and go light on the oil, because over-oiling is what kills the sensor nearly every time. A filter that's still damp or freshly drowned in oil is the exact moment that varnish starts building on your MAF. And don't take a word of this as permission to ignore your air filter altogether. A filthy, clogged paper filter chokes the engine too. The answer was never neglect. It's a clean factory filter changed on schedule, every 20,000 miles or so. Now here's the honest truth about the whole upgrade in the first place. On a stock engine, a drop-in high-flow filter gives you a power gain so small that no human being could feel it in the seat of his pants. The kind of number that barely twitches the needle on a dyno. You're trading real, proven filtration for a gain you will never notice, and taking on the risk of oil baked across your sensor to get it. If you truly love the deeper sound, I understand the appeal. Just go in knowing exactly what you're trading for it and keep that sensor clean. Now let me stack up what this actually costs, because this is where it all lands. That filter or intake ran you $60 to $80 for a simple drop-in, or $250 and well up from there for a full kit. For that money, the promise on the box was more power. What it delivered was a power gain you can't feel, worse fuel economy you can feel on every fill-up, and a film of oil quietly baking onto a sensor that runs $150 to $350 to replace. And if that lean running or a nagging misfire quietly kills your catalytic converter somewhere down the road, that's $1,000 to $2,500 spent on a part you bolted on to help. Line the whole thing up, and the math is almost hard to believe. You spent money to lose power. You spent more at the pump. You put your engine at risk of extra wear, and you set yourself up for a new sensor and maybe a converter, all to replace a paper filter that cost almost nothing and was quietly doing everything right. And it follows you right to the end. When it's time to sell or trade, a sharp buyer who pops the hood and finds an aftermarket intake doesn't read it as more power. He reads it as a question, wondering what else got tinkered with, and he quietly knocks money off his offer for the worry. The stock car, the boring one that was left alone, is the one that holds its value. That is the entire story of the performance upgrade that isn't. It was never built to make your car faster. It was built to sell you a box. And you were never the fool in this. You were sold a feeling, more power, a bolder sound, a little pride under the hood, dressed up as a fact. The people who keep a paid-off truck running clean to 300,000 aren't the ones chasing bolt-on horsepower. They're the ones who left the airbox alone and changed a cheap filter on time. And if it gets under your skin that somebody sold you a fix your car never needed, wait until you see what your dealer's own service department has been charging you for. A whole menu of services your car never needed either. That video is on the screen right now. Click it and I'll see you there.